right, welcome back to another episode of Winnie's Travels, everyone. I think it might officially be spring. In this episode, I'll be going over how I built this handy dandy little propane shed for my propane tanks. So check this out. Ta-da! I made this. Okay, so some exciting stuff is happening with this shed. I've got the first layer and second layer, and then I still have to do the sort of top layer. Sorry for all the stuff in the background, but I'm not gonna clean up my shop for this YouTube video. Okay, so yeah, this is the first floor of my shed, the first tier of the double-tiered cake shelf shed situation. And I just want to go over the parts that I used and how I put them together. First, I want to talk about what I have on the bottom here. So these two pieces, they run the length of the shed here. And they are 1.5 inch thick pieces of like decking. It's called like pre-treated, pressure-treated decking, and I just got the cheapest kind, but the cheapest kind that was pressure-treated so that it can, you know, safely sort of like, or I mean, it's still gonna rot and stuff over time, but it's definitely better than using some of the other kinds of wood that I used for different parts. These parts here, all these 4 little legs here, that's just a 2x4. I didn't salvage wood for this because it's the bottom tier, so it's going to be holding a lot of weight, and I wanted to make sure I used a solid wood as opposed to like part of a bed frame or something that I found where I don't really know the integrity of it. In terms of how I attached these pieces together, my uncle bought me some corner clamps. My uncle and aunt, excuse me, bought me some corner clamps for Christmas this year because I'm working on this project. So that was really nice of them. And I actually used those to just clamp these 2 pieces together, this piece and this piece first, and then I did the other half. And I just screwed into the bottom. So I didn't use any pocket holes or anything like that. Super basic, just screwing, pre-drilling first and then screwing into the bottom. And I use all exterior screws, screws that are meant to be used outside so that I won't have any additional like rust problems or anything like that. The only thing I'm worried about, like maybe not holding up super well over time, is the bed frame, because that is supposed to be for the interior and not the exterior. So I made sure to really only use it in the places where I felt like it wasn't going to get as much weather. Down here, it's supported by this section here, and on the second tier, it's really only like the doors will prevent it from really interfacing with much weather. So I figured that would be okay. Okay, so now moving on to the second tier, everything I did was pretty much exactly the same except for this situation right here, the sort of cross beams. And the reason I put this cross beam in between these 2 pieces of wood is because the 2 propane tanks that will sit up on this first layer are really heavy. They are both 20 pounds. And so I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't just, you know, I could have just put this whole piece, like, you know, kept this 2x4 running along here, and then this would have been this much shorter, and I would have screwed in from here, or, you know, used pocket holes to screw in from the bottom or something like that. And that's usually how you make cabinets. You know, you have the piece on the side going up the entire length, and then you screw in the shelves sort of wherever you want them. But I wanted to make sure that I had a lot of integrity because if it was only just 2 screws being poked in here or down here, any weight on this, you know, now there's a lot of support because this beam, this entire beam and the other 3 legs to this first tier are actually supporting this beam here and all this wood and the 2 propane tanks. So I feel like this is a lot stronger. It is definitely a more difficult way to put together a cabinet, and it's definitely not standard, but just based on the laws of weight and physics, I just figured this made more sense in this context. And how I put this part together, so this is the bed frame, right, that goes along the entire length of the shelf, and then this part here, this piece of wood is just a piece of 1/2 inch plywood that I found. It was actually a piece of wood that a friend of mine had used for an art project back in the day. And so it was just kind of also in my garage. And I salvaged that to basically screw down. I needed something you know, where would I have screwed in if I was putting this part on top of this part? There really wouldn't have been any way to access it except with pocket holes, but I don't really have that ability. So I decided the best thing to do would be to use this sort of intermediary piece so I was able to do the same thing that I did on the bottom and screw directly up into this piece of wood, putting these two pieces together. And then you can see this piece extends twice as long. And so then what I was able to do is attach all of this together by screwing down in here. You can see one screw right there. And I just screwed directly down through all these pieces of wood so that this way everything is connected, but not directly through this piece here. Like these pieces aren't directly connected. There's this, these two are connected, these two are connected, and then these are all connected here. So that's definitely, again, not a typical way of doing anything at all ever. I don't think I've ever seen anyone build anything like that, but it works really well. Like this is so sturdy, and I feel like definitely if you have, you know, any suggestions or reasons why people don't do things like this, then please let me know in the comments. But honestly, it worked really well, so I'm really happy with it. And yeah, that's how I did it. And then basically these pieces here are all 1 inch thick, right? So I had to double this piece of plywood's only 1/2 inch thick. And so I just added another 1/2 inch piece. And then I was able to double the width so that these are all 1 inch. And that way, when I put the propane tanks here, there's not going to be some weird dip here where the propane tanks could kind of tip over if they were kind of in that corner. Alrighty, here is the sweet Mama Jamma once installed. Once I had the frame, the final steps were to attach the sides, attach the roof, and attach the doors with the hinges and the locks. So let's go over how I did that. All right, the first part, the sides, was super easy. I just cut 2 pieces of OSB and screwed them in the same places on both sides with these white exterior screws that I got for this project that I think look really nice with the OSB. Okay, so the second part, the roof, was also really easy. What I did for this is I just took the PVC plastic that I had cut and deburred along one edge, and I screwed 3 times into the front here and twice up at the top where the chunky parts are so that it's tilted. And then this little flap lays perfectly against the fiberglass wall so that when rain flows down, it's flowing onto the plastic instead of down the wall further and where the propane system is going from the inside to the outside where that actual hole is. So yeah, these screws are the kind that come with the little squishy washer, and that's important. You have to use that type of screw when drilling through this type of plastic so that you don't damage the plastic. But the screws that I had were 1 5/8 inches long, so if I'd used them down here at this 1/2 inch wood lip, then they would have not only shown through, which wouldn't have looked good, but when I opened the door, they actually would have gotten caught on the door, so that wouldn't have worked. And so I just paired the washers that came with these screws, the taller ones, with shorter screws so that I could not run into that problem. I think that's a super exciting part of DIY building, is coming up with creative solutions to problems that you run into. It can be super frustrating, but then once you come up with a solution, sometimes it'll feel like such common sense, but it's still such an exciting thing, and it makes you feel really good. So I love sharing stuff like that. And then there isn't actually a roof here. so I can stick my hand in, and that's on purpose so that I can really easily turn on the propane tanks once I've pushed them into the shed and laid them there. But then there also isn't a back wall, so theoretically I could also reach around the back wall and turn them on there. But it's super convenient to go either way. Reaching around the back is great for when you need to hook up new tanks. So yeah, that's it. Okay, so the only tricky part was attaching the doors with the hinges and the locks here. So the problem that I ran into, the hinges and the locks came with screws of their own that were all 3/4 of an inch, which worked totally fine on the sides here. Because I was just able to screw those into the OSB and then the 2x4 that's propping up the first and second tiers. But here, these screws here, when you open the door, there is this 2x4 here, which is part of the frame. And so those screws, because they would have been 3/4 of an inch long, would have just totally poked into this wood and you wouldn't have been able to close the door successfully. So what I did is I found teeny tiny little screws in my miscellaneous box of screws, and I used those. I found, thankfully, enough of them that I was able to use them at all of these points, and they were all like 1/4 of an inch long. So that was perfect because that's the exact width of this wood. And then for these screws here, I didn't want them to, when you open the door, I didn't want you to get poked by the tips of the screws poking out of the wood. And so even if I used really short ones, that would happen. So what I did actually is I used machine undercut screws for these locks here, which don't have a pointy end. So that worked out really well, and I got those for free too because my dad had a box of them that I got from our house. So yeah, that is it, and I am very excited. That's my shed. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay tuned in the next few days. I'll be posting a video covering how I actually hooked up my propane system, fit all those pieces together, and got my propane heater working just in time for it to get warm. Am I right? And in the description below, check out the link to my website and store where you can get merch, everyone. And lastly, stay tuned, as always, for more videos of Winnie's travels, me learning how to build myself a house. Things are heating up, my friends.